So now it's a second great pleasure to welcome our second keynote speaker of the afternoon. This is Professor Arnout van der Rijt, who is a professor of sociology at the European University Institute. He has a PhD in sociology from Cornell University in 2007. He specializes in social networks, collective action, and social stratification. He won the 2010 Lawrence Friedman Award from the International Network of Social Network Analysts, and they should know. He also has won several other awards as well, and is the editor-in-chief of Sociological Science. One thing you notice from looking at your Google Scholar page is that you're really good at titles. You have lots of articles with really good titles. And it looks like today's lecture is no exception. Luck and success in millions of life courses. I'm sure everyone really wants to know what you're going to say about that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me also, the organizers. Great to be able to share some of my work with you today. I would like to start with a question, and that is, the question will follow, if this is going to work, yes, this example. My question is going to be, did you ever experience something like this? Hopefully not, by the way. But it can also go in a positive direction. So in this case, we have a case of a snowball effect, both in a literal and a figurative sense. A young boy hits a passing car with a snowball. The driver of the car chases the boy back to his home, breaks the door in, threatens the family, and leaves. The damage done to the door, however, provides a justification for the landlord to evict the family. The family subsequently struggles to find adequate housing, moving from one insecure situation to another until social services eventually breaks the family apart. And of course, what we would like to know is, without the snowball incident, how much better would the family have fared? And you've probably, about happier things that happened in your life, wondered, was there something that triggered a sequence of events that led me to where I am now? And if that hadn't happened, I would be a completely different person, making a very different income and having a very different level of prestige. Anyone? Go ahead.
My experience.
Just one example is enough.
Like family decisions, like when parents decide to move, they change their work, they lose a job.
Parents decide to move, yeah, which changed who your friends were, and changed schools was difficult for you to make new friends. Maybe that set you back, and you would have been a more famous individual if they hadn't. Other example. Yes?
I think it also works in the other direction. I met my partner back in Hamburg and he dragged me to Graz, which I didn't have on my map at all. And I think this is part of why I'm here now. I'm now a computational social scientist because of this coincidence meeting him.
Perfect example, yeah, in the positive direction, since we're here to celebrate computational science. Maybe one last example, if there's someone eager to share one. Yes?
I went here instead of swimming today, and I learned a lot of things today. And I think this will have this will likely start a positive course of events maybe in the future.
That's an amazing example. Is that your dad sitting next to you? Did he tell you to mention this? Excellent, great job, and I hope this will end up being true. Okay, so now not all of these events, the moving, yes, not the meeting your partner probably, yes, maybe the attending the computational social science conference, but not all of these kinds of trigger events are systematically measured in data that we have, but a lot of things that might trigger these sorts of sequences are regularly measured in data, and we are going to look at millions of life courses in which such a thing might happen, and we're going to examine if we can find these sorts of snowballing sequences of events leading to significant long-term consequences. So here are just some examples from my side. To fall just below or above the admissions thresholds for an elite college. Your parents divorce, your partner goes through a difficult health period, you enter the job market in an economic boom, you grow up with an older sibling, your classmates are all younger than you, which makes you look smarter and stronger than everybody else. You're promoted early because of a retiring senior colleague, or you're laid off due to a firm closure. And these are all events that are recorded in registered data, and a lot of the ones that I just mentioned we're going to see analyze. So what is the idea of the snowballing effect? This is, of course, based on a notion that we're all very familiar with, which is backed up by these grand statements, grand theories of Matthew effect and cumulative advantage that suggest that when something happened, there isn't just the direct effect of the unlucky event. There isn't just the immediate pain or the immediate benefit that results from the very event. It's also the case that it can create a domino where that event leads to another event that couldn't have happened without that earlier event. And that event is actually bigger than the original trigger event. And maybe that leads to a growing rift between those who got the initial advantage and those who didn't get the initial advantage. However, now we're going to problematize this logic. Even though it's intuitive and we can come up with examples where we speculate that this is in fact what took place in our own lives, I think if we think holistically of an individual's life course, right, then there's a lot of events that of this type that might be the trigger of some domino effect. But they all have to happen in the same life course, right? So if those trigger events themselves are not strongly correlated, then you can see how how these things are going to clash, right? Because you cannot have, one event let the life course run in one direction with an orthogonal event happening later, taking you in a different direction. That cannot be part of the same snowballing effect. So reinforcement requires that these dominoes topple, that they are positively correlated with one another. And if we can come up with a lot of these kind of orthogonal events that don't seem to be very much triggered by the previous events, then we can start to question maybe it isn't so easy to see a snowballing effect in the life course. So to make it specific, we can ask these questions. Firstborns, are they strongly predictive of being the oldest in class? No. It's not, both firstborns and secondborns could be the oldest or the youngest in class. Does parental divorce early in life strongly predict graduating during recession? Probably not. Does firm closure experienced in my 30s strongly predict partners' health problems in my 40s? There could be a weak link, but it's probably not a very strong effect either, right? So as we think this through, I think we get to this notion of countervalence. In the presence of orthogonal events, good luck in one setting and then the resulting positive reinforcement may be countervailed by bad luck at another point. Lotteries can cancel each other out. So I might be born in January, which is great, because that means that in Sweden I will be the oldest in class. But then my parents got divorced. Yeah, that was not helpful for me. I'm the oldest sibling, which means that I got my mommy and papa's time for a few years without there being another sibling around. But then I graduated in a recession, even though my younger sister or brother graduated in an economic upturn. So if this leads to countervalence, then the cumulative effects of chance events might wane. They might get interrupted or interfered with. And to formalize this, we're going to start with a simple reinforcement model that many of you will be familiar with, the Polya-Urn model. And this represents life very simplistically as a sequence of lotteries, or actually draws from an urn. The urn initially has a red and a black ball. When we draw a ball, we put the ball back and a copy of that ball. So if we draw a red ball in the first draw, on the next round there's going to be 2 red balls and 1 black ball. And clearly you can see how here in this process, in this baseline process, the lotteries are strongly correlated with earlier lotteries. And so this is a model of reinforcement, and indeed it leads to early draws to be very determinative of the fraction of balls of that color that are ultimately in the urn. Now, what we're going to do is change this model to occasionally allow for an uncorrelated lottery, that orthogonal event that we just had these examples of. So what we're going to do is have a second urn that we previously were not considering. We call that E. That urn also has a black and a red ball. But when we draw from that urn, we do something different. So now we start again with a red and black ball also in the P urn. And with probability Q, which is not all the time, but probability Q, we draw a random ball from the P urn, put it back in the P urn, and add a copy to the P urn, just like we did before. But then, with probability 1 minus Q, we're going to draw a random ball from the E urn, put it back in the E urn, and add a copy of that ball to the P urn. Yeah? So now you see how this is going to interfere and dilute the reinforcement process. And so this is a generalized urn process as defined in Hill et al. 1980, and has some formal features that we can use to study the long-term behavior of this process. And just to note that Q1 is the original Polya urn model. So let's now study the long-term behavior of these urn processes. When Q1, the original Polya urn model, we know that it's going to converge almost surely to a uniform distribution from a single red or a single black ball. And very determinative of where in that uniform distribution it's going to converge to are the early draws. So this is going to lock in. If we draw a lot of reds early on, we're going to end up with a urn with a lot of red balls. It has persistent effects on the life course, on the simplistic life courses. If Q is smaller than 1, however, and we have diluted the thing with this other urn where we just have these independent draws, then the process converges almost surely to 1/2. So lock-in is not going to happen. It means that these snowball effects that we dream of and imagine happen in our lives, they are no longer happening. They weaken over time, and life takes over, and they get dampened by something else. So you could still have stretches of time where a sequence of events happens that has consequences for you, but eventually these effects are going to fade away, which is illustrated in the simulation plots at the bottom. Okay, so this yields to 2 clean hypotheses that are contrasting with one another. The reinforcement hypothesis based on the original Polya urn model, which is inconsistent with our ideas of snowballing effects. The effect of an unlucky event on success grows or is at least sustained with time, depending on what reinforcement model you choose. Or the idea of countervalence, that the effect of an unlucky event on success might be extended, but it ultimately fades as countervailing events interfere. So what we're now going to do is move to the empirical part and consider this wonderful Swedish register data, which not only has these millions of people that I had in the title, but it also has very long stretches of time because Sweden has been carefully taking administrative records of individual lives in these many ways for a very long time. So we can go back all the way to the 60s and follow people who had something happen back then and now see if many years, even decades later, we can detect the difference between them and some alter ego Swede in the data set to whom that didn't happen. Yeah? And so we're going to estimate the long-term success effects of 6 unlucky events. And for each, we will draw on a causal design from the event-specific literature. And we're doing that also so that we now don't have to go through these 6 causal designs, because that will be a headache so late in the afternoon. So I hope that you can trust me on this. In the Q&A, I'll be happy to answer any questions about them. And we're going to look at wage as the success measure. So here we're going to look at income as an outcome. Yeah? Income from wage earnings. And this is, of course, a restricted outcome. You can imagine many others, but it is, of course, still a very important success variable, and it's also observed continuously in the same way over a long stretch of time, unlike other outcomes which could be discrete and happen only once in your life. So we can clearly then also examine how the dynamics play out for this one variable. Okay, so here are the 6 events that we're going to analyze. It's being born in December versus January. Just like I said, in Sweden, makes you either the oldest or the youngest kid in the classroom. And there are series about how this leads to differential treatment by teachers, how this makes you look or actually be more likely to be the best or the worst performing kid in the classroom. This might have psychological effects and so on. And it's well known that this has at least short-term impact on educational achievement, and therefore potentially also long-term impact on income. Being born second parental expectations and the resource dilution that I mentioned before. If you are the first, you get to get all the resources from your parents and the parental attention and investments for a period of time in your life without the second-born being around. As second-born, you don't have that privilege until you're in your adolescence. And then it might not matter as much anymore. And we're using sibling fixed effects, meaning we're going to compare siblings within families. Third thing is you might, by accident, end up in a classroom that has relatively few privileged kids or relatively a lot of privileged kids, and that might affect your educational performance through negative spillovers, the lower level, the speed at which the classroom is going, and the lack of cultural exposure that you might get in this classroom. Oh, and we're using sibling and school fixed effects here to identify a causal effect. So we're looking at siblings going to the same school in the same family who happen to be in a higher SES environment than their other sibling in that same school. Then the data even have admission scores for individuals. So we look at an elite university, Stockholm School of Economics, and we look at individuals who landed just below or just above the funding threshold. Maybe a bad night or a fever could have led you to fall on either side of this funding threshold, or a difficult question to which you just didn't happen to know the answer. And we're using a fuzzy regression discontinuity design because there isn't a perfect correspondence between your score and whether you actually end up enrolled at the university or admitted to the university. So that's the fourth. The fifth, firm closure. Here the idea, of course, is you need to accept a lower paying job suddenly, or you might be unemployed for a while. This might have long-term scarring effects of unemployment for the economists amongst us who know about this. It might have psychological factors, and we're using coarse exact matching here on the pre-treatment wage trajectories to identify a causal effect. And then finally, graduating in a recession for similar reasons. You might end up unemployed. You might end up with a lower starting wage early in your career that might have potential long-term scarring effects on your income. And we use an instrumental variable approach here to avoid the selection bias of trying to graduate after the recession by staying longer in school. Okay, so before we do these causal analysis, these 6 causal analysis, which I will do in record time, first to check, is it actually true what we assumed before, that many of these life course events are not actually strongly correlated with one another? Answer is clearly yes. Like we thought, making it into the university or not, graduating during recession, low SES cohort, second-born, they are all very lowly correlated with one another, close to 0. So they certainly should function according to the model as these orthogonal events that are going to break the snowballing triggered by the other events. Okay, here are the results. So what you're looking at on the y-axis is the wage rank. So minus 0.01 means being born in December reduces your rank, and this is literally the rank within all the Swedes, in the income distribution compared to being born in January. And the effect is about minus 0.013. But that effect, as you can see, reduces and goes closer to 0 over the course of your life, which is consistent with the self-correction model, with the fading effect. And it's even the case that very late in your career, the December-born who are 11 months younger have potentially a health advantage or an advantage of having been in the labor market 11 months longer. So we see a slight positive effect, but this is an interpretation. Now, this pattern of an initial negative effect followed by a fading is indeed present and can be seen in all of these cases. And I can go through any of these in detail if you want. But the big picture is, in all of these cases, if we look far enough into the future, we basically see the effect go to 0, and we don't see a persistence of these unfortunate circumstances earlier in the life of these individuals. Okay, now you could say, well, okay, hello, this is Sweden. It is a very nice country, happy to be here. People are taken care of. If something bad happens to you, everything is going to be all right. There are other countries in the world, Amir already alluded to it, that can be a little rougher on people, and one of these countries is the United States of America. And so we could say, okay, maybe we should look there and see if things play out very differently there. And since the original example that we started off with, the actual snowballing followed by the snowball came from the United States. So we did the same recession at graduation and firm closure analysis in the United States, and we replicate the results. So also recession at graduation in the United States. This is one of them is PSID data. I think the one on the right. I can't keep track of all the data sets that we've used here. And the other is the current population survey. And in case of firm closure, we also see, the scars are clearly deeper in the US. So you see a minus 0.3 wage percentile is really large. It's a huge cut in your income, but it does slowly over time. And of course, we are 13 to 15 years out. So it's not like a huge amount of wealth did get lost in the meantime, the area under the curve. But we don't see the snowballing does reduce in momentum, but maybe we are seeing a little bit of a difference here with Sweden, where the effects are bigger and a little bit more dragged out. So in the final discussion point I wanted to mention, and I'm going to end the talk here, is to say, okay, but what we know of these kind of snowballing in other contexts. For example, and you yourself in 2018 published a paper in which you showed that if you get early in your career a grant, because you just fell above the funding threshold and someone else fell below it, then subsequently you're going to accumulate more than double the amount of research funding. And if I look over that 8-year period, okay, maybe we should go back to the data now in 2025 and see where it is now. But at least if we look at the patterns, it doesn't seem to be converging. So how's that possible then? How does that fit your story? And I think the answer comes from the EARN model that we've been considering, which is, if there's more reinforcement and there's less countervalence, then there is the possibility for these snowballs to happen. So presumably science, with scientific success as an outcome, is a different beast. In that case, these reinforcement effects are strong enough to create these huge inequalities over a long period of time. And Max Weber, a favorite among the sociologists who are here, himself, we all know him, but he himself claims that he could easily not have been known amongst you. Namely, I know of hardly any career on earth where chance plays such a role. I may say so, all the more since I personally owe it to some mere accidents that during my very early years I was appointed to a full professorship in a discipline in which men of my generation undoubtedly had achieved more than I had. And indeed, I fancy on the basis of my experience that I have a sharp eye for the undeserved fate of the many whom accident has cast in the opposite direction and who within the selective apparatus, in spite of all their ability, do not attain the positions that are due to them. So this conclusion that science would be a different place where these snowballing effects do more easily happen is consistent with the much celebrated Max Weber, who could have ended up being a very unknown individual. So to conclude, and I don't know if I'm over time or doing fine. Great, okay, then I will speak slower. In general, a lock-in requires a threshold level of reinforcement. So it is not enough for one thing to lead to another. It needs to lead to the other thing in a forceful enough way. And it shouldn't be interfered with a countervailing influence, because that is going to dilute it, and it's going to slow the process, and the snowball doesn't happen. So this is the general insight here. And some contexts, like science, seem to be of the level where Q is 1, or presumably some other model that captures the same kind of essence of a trade-off between orthogonal events and reinforcement. And other contexts like income, both in Sweden and also in the rougher United States, doesn't seem to have the conditions to keep bringing forward the snowballing effect. So in terms of income, it seems that many counterfactual lives that that you could have lived or could be living in the future, in many of these lives, you would be making approximately the same income as what is suggested by this analysis. But who knows, in maybe one of them you win the Nobel Prize. And that's the end of my talk.
Okay, wonderful. We have time for some questions. Who's got a question? There's somebody right here.
Thank you for this thought-provoking talk. So this sort of makes me think about the distribution of luck and bad luck, right? So there's something sort of almost hidden, right? That's implicit in your talk. And I'm wondering if you can say something about that, like observing basically these residuals and these heterogeneity. Is that, I mean, in a way you might say it's not only one snowball, it's like multiple, right? Where this kid moved into a different neighborhood and it sort of ended up badly, but it could have been like they moved to some other place that actually was flourishing or maybe clashing with some other people's bad luck and good luck. So can you tell us a little bit about like how we could study the distribution of luck or bad luck?
Okay. So, and by distribution, do you mean across
the population?
Okay, so other families that could have experienced this event but then didn't, and how much of the variance or the distribution is due to this? Well, I would say that we have done this to some extent, not with the snowball example, but I think that by having done the causal indifference designs are intended to create a situation in which we're trying to create two very similar individuals or families, one of which experiences an event, the other does not. And the effect is in some cases, the local treatment effect, others, the average treatment effect, is the average difference in the effect size. So that is the part of the distribution that can be attributed to that.
Right, but those are the averages, right? What I mean is like you really want to go down to the level of I. We're talking kind of like basically counterfactual for that unit, which would be different from the average treatment effect, or even the conditional, because the conditional is a substrata estimate. But you know, basically we are after counterfactuals now because we're talking about specific individual lives.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's complicated. That's a good question. There's one slide that I have here that might get at this, because what we're doing here, we're crossing multiple events. So, like for example, one reason you might want to not be interested in the averages, but in the distributions is because you could say it might be true that on average the effect fizzles out, but it could be that, you know, if two positive things happen, you know, the snowball takes off in that direction, or then gets corrected in the opposite direction. So very interesting interaction effects could be taking place that have zero as an average, but actually they have, you know, they contribute to the variance and they have interesting alternative trajectories. So here, what we are trying to get after is, suppose that you get lucky twice. So you're born in January and your firm doesn't close, which happens in most of the cases, luckily. Yeah. Then your wage rank converges. Yeah. It still converges. So two times lucky still doesn't do it. And the red solid line is where you first, where you're born in December. That is a disadvantage, but then your firm also doesn't close. That converges. And then the twice unlucky is the dashed red line. So even if you get the double disadvantage, so if we follow the cascade, it also still returns. And the blue line is the other in-between case. So I think maybe this slightly helps us feel like the average is capturing the dynamics and is not misrepresenting trajectories that together could be leading to a zero average, if this helps answer the question. Very long answer, but I hope this was illustrative. Okay, I look forward to talking more about this.
Yeah, very interesting. Right over here. I know it's...
Oh, I see a lot of
here.
hands. Oh, hey.
Very, very interesting talk. I guess thinking about what you said about the rougher United States made me think a lot about sort of some measure of well-being at the individual level and how that might have to incorporate income from investments. So especially in a world where people are making contributions to their own 401k, and that's what's what they're living off of later. Have you thought about trying to actually aggregate to compute some measures of wealth or well-being later in life, because those early years after, say, losing a job are years where there's a huge amount of investment growth possible, and so that would be creating this kind of rich get richer phenomenon as well.
Yes, this is definitely something to look into. Of course, wealth itself is, or wealth, the wealth accumulated from your income is the area under the curve. So, or at least an approximation of it, taking interest into account. But with that wealth, in the meantime, maybe you would have bought a house, or you would have sent your kid to school, to a better school, or like a lot of things that might have other permanent effects might have happened. And so this is definitely on our agenda to look first. We just want to take this first cut, looking at a clean, simple variable like income, and see if for that it works. But it's absolutely possible that some of these, while the snowballing is slowing down, there are other things that are really hurting that do have permanent effects. Yeah. So absolutely, this is part of the next step.
I'm over here just raising the hand so you can see on your right. Great. So my question would be, how does your outcome variable affect the outcomes you're seeing? So you chose wage rank, but obviously the distribution of wages is, not normal. Let's just call it that. And the other element is you could have like binary classifications, like did you become a millionaire and whatnot. But also over time, people's wages, when in your 20s, you make usually less than you make in your 50s, right? And so differences might matter a lot less in your 20s and matter a lot more in your 50s. So I'm curious how you think about different ways to operationalize what your outcome variable is.
So the millionaire threshold we haven't considered, but just wage we have done. It just gets messier because you have the natural wage growth, and we're looking at age over time. So this seemed like a better representation. But yeah, that is. It's interesting to also because it gets at the distributional point that was made here earlier. Maybe there is something happening in the extremes that we're not capturing with the average effects. So yeah, these are good suggestions. There's one thing that is related to your point, which is the concern that one might have the intuition that if you may take wage rank, you're flattening something that can grow. And maybe wages themselves already are also quite bounded in the sense, especially in Sweden, in terms of, can you really, what can it snowball into? You're just going to get taxed more, right? So you could have that concern. So one question that is interesting in this context is, can you have a process of lock-in in a distribution like that without the distribution increasing in variance? And so the answer to that is actually yes. And it gives me the opportunity to show you this recent paper of ours. So this model will produce for a distribution with fixed variance lock-in. So it's not impossible to find lock-in in this variable. But yeah, the distribution absolutely has also something to do with the ability for snowballing to take place. Yeah. Thank you for this thought.
We've got quite a few questions now, so maybe we could take a couple. Would that be all right?
Sure.
Yeah.
I'll try to remember them.
Okay, I'll try to remember them. Where's the next one?
Yeah, exactly. The left one.
Here.
Over there.
I have a question about, so that I know that that's a different line of research, but have you had a chance to look at how life satisfaction of these people also changed during time? Life satisfaction or happiness levels?
Are we collecting questions?
We're going to take one more question.
Thank you.
Happiness.
Yes, hi, thank you for your talk. And I think in general it's good news that such a bad incident does not affect your wage rank, even though it's, especially the last graph you showed, also has some implications for generational mobility, right? So basically your results also indicate that intragenerational mobility is basically not possible, even if you're lucky as well. And I would be interested in your thoughts about that.
Okay, I'll take these two. Okay, so no, we haven't looked at satisfaction measures, but it is one of many variables to explore and an important one, yeah, or happiness-related measures like that, yeah. So I'm not sure that the result implies that mobility isn't possible. It's just not possible through luck. Or not possible, we haven't proven. It's just that for these 6 events, we can't find an average luck-driven effect that produces, long-term mobility within the life course. But of course, hard work is still around as a possibility. So I think there are other mechanisms that can produce mobility. But yeah, if we think of luck as a mobility-generating mechanism, yeah. I mean, and we haven't looked at all lucky events. Of course, there may still be other events that are simply of a permanent nature, and that might mix the stratification ladder. But so I think that the conclusion about mobility is more limited. We've shown that these specific luck-driven snowballing effects are not going to have long-term mobility effects, but there's other ways for this to happen.
Have we got more questions? Okay, there.
Hi, very interesting talk. So in this scenario, you've constructed or you've selected uncorrelated events, but have you thought about trying to quantify the extent to which events are actually correlated in real, like, I guess what I'm trying to say is it seems like in real life, unlucky events are actually correlated. So if your parents are divorced, maybe one parent has a higher likelihood of having a mental health issue that's probably associated maybe with a lower income, et cetera, et cetera. So it seems like there might be an actual distribution of, or an actual matrix you could create of like correlations of events.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. The issue that we're having is I have no idea how to begin to think about how to sample these events. Like, it just seems like an undefined space. Like, we could come up inductively with examples, but maybe we also need a tighter definition. But what would follow? But of course, maybe for starters, we can simply expand the matrix and try to come up with more examples such as the one you give, and see if this orthogonality is exactly what the distribution, if it's a general principle, or whether this happened to be 6 cases that were very orthogonal, but there's many others that are not. One thing about it, it's just that, of course, we don't make the argument that we don't need the argument that they're all orthogonal. Because for Q is smaller than 1, which means only some of them, right? That's enough for the process to converge over time.
Is there a time for a follow-up or no?
Well, we've got quite a few questions, but yeah.
Right. Right top here. Thank you for the great talk. A short question. You already mentioned that how context might moderate the bouncing back or the severity of the downturn. I'm also wondering, there's of course many resources we have that make us more resilient for these things, and I imagine you have data on parental wealth, etc. So have you explored any like differences or distributions, as was asked before, across other dimensions of privilege?
Yes. So the answer is barely. We've only looked for race in the United States as a moderator, and there we didn't find a difference in the corrective trajectories. But this is just skimming the surface. I think this is absolutely a major direction forward, is to say, because we have theories in the life course about compensatory advantage and buffering, and it totally makes sense that some of these processes, that indeed for some categories of individuals that are more precarious and less buffered, some of these effects might be much longer lasting and perhaps lock in. Yeah, so absolutely.
Well, there were questions over here. I'm very conscious. I think you in particular, and you.
Yeah, and there also have a question.
Well, okay, I'm afraid that might have to be it. Though I'm not sure that the distribution is spatially distributed.
Can I? Yeah.
Yeah.
So
go ahead.
wonderful talk. You have looked into Sweden and US. Have you thought about looking into the developing country like India or China or some South African country where you can find how these things play, where there are more gradients like caste and class and all those issues are there? So how those things will come out in those countries?
Well, we haven't done it, but we would love to do that, yeah. Because that definitely, it would be quite the bias to think that the US is on the extreme of this distribution, yeah. So, this is absolutely a way forward, yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I've got some questions over here. Over
Yes,
here.
I'm here. Here I am.
Hi.
Yeah. So thanks for your talk. I guess following up on some of these last comments, one thing that I think would be very interesting would be to play around with the, let's say, intersection of different outcomes, different maybe socio-demographic variables of departure, class, you mentioned race, but also I'm thinking about gender, and then thinking about how in specific context, one specific unlucky outcome for one specific social group is likely to generate negative outcomes. For instance, I was thinking at the example you presented in your first slide, so losing a home. And I guess that in some countries that would generate a bigger penalty than in others. But also, I think it would be interesting to explore it along the gender dimension, for instance, unexpected pregnancy, or I think becoming a parent when you're not planned, it might be having different consequences depending on depending on your gender. So yes, I was wondering to what extent you have looked into it yet, but if I understood it correctly, it's much in the way forward. Yeah.
It's definitely the way forward. I mean, I would like to do it systematically, right? Because one could say, well, that moderator with that subcategory yeah, it would be good if we could identify, based on the model, for example, systematically what, or some kind of principle like buffering or enhancement that exists in theory. What sorts of events, such as that would naturally fall into these categories. So, because then we could hypothesize and we could say, and then really test theory here, because it's interesting enough to try to find exceptions to these general patterns. But I think it's also interesting if we can, anticipate in advance what the exceptions are going to be, so that we feel like we understand how it works. Yeah.
Somebody else down here? Who was promised? Yes.
Yeah, thanks for the great talk. I had kind of two thoughts building on your last slide about science, and I think there was an implication in that slide that we've been building our theories about cumulative advantage and the Matthew effect kind of based on our home turf, and that science might be actually quite distinct in how it works. Bundled together with this reinforcement versus countervailing is lots of other things. It's, the degree of competition in the field and the degree of consensus in the field around shared targets. You could imagine that those might matter just as much as if there's sort of reinforcing patterns. And, the other thing that might be challenging with comparing science to other field is that salary is quite blunt, right? And it might be very subject to these types of countervailing influences. And so maybe a more fair comparison would be with, fields where you can have a kind of target of competition, like ability to progress in a kind of a track in your company or something like that. So, and it's sort of kind of beyond the exact things you're presenting today, but it's kind of moving forward. Just it'd be great to hear your thoughts about that.
So, I mean, of course, it fits with some of the other comments. That there are other contexts in which the snowballing might be more pervasive. But what would you, if I can, I'm going to do the cheap thing and ask you the question back. Like, what would be a marker of a context in which these things would be different? Like, so. I agree with the intuition that wages is something that seems compressed somehow and maybe doesn't have the flexibility of allowing a snowballing effect to take place. So
it's not so much a context, it's more about a measure.
Oh, okay.
The wage actually can't the wage is more subject to kind of lots of countervarying influences. And what you're measuring in a lot of fields is going to be not able to capture the kinds of effects.
Yeah, I agree. This is very possible, and it's just the next step should simply be to look for more measures then, and see if it generalizes or is very different. Yeah.
That's one question.
Thank you for the great talk. My question is in relationship to social inequality. For me, these 6 events are likelier to happen to people in a poorer environment due to, for example, firm closure and even divorce. So, these happen reinforcing in the richer environment as well as the poor environment would have naturally created a social stratification. First of all, is that even true? And secondly, from a actor perspective, from the perspective of these people, these underdogs, is there anything the actor can do in the fact that it is actually small event, basically in the earlier phase of their life, cascading into the future success or failure? Is there anything the actors actually can do to amplify the success and prevent the failures? Thank you.
Okay. 2 good questions. I mean, start with the latter. Of course, some people simply find themselves in a riskier environment and it would be harder to take out insurance, quote unquote. Or if they don't take risk, that might itself lead to poorer outcomes. I mean, we have theories about risk-taking by educational background of the parents, and how that is one mechanism by which class is reproduced. And I think that actually answers your first question as well, because, you're absolutely right that some of these events are more likely to happen to some classes of people. I think that what we're interested in here is when we take people from just that class to which these events are happening, do we then see these events, pull out the distribution, produce extra variability there, or or are these just temporary things that die out? So, I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think that was going to be all questions. I think one of the things we might conclude is that Sweden is quite a lucky place to be.
It is a lovely place.
Lovely and lucky, not least because of all the data that they have to be able to measure the distribution of the luck and do research like this. Anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It was great.